Well, welcome again to another session of the 18th annual Transforming the Teaching and Learning Environment Virtual Conference. I'm Bob Ailes, I'm your moderator. This year we're sponsored by the Journal of Educators Online, JEO. They have some great refereed articles. If you take time to explore, you'd find a lot of stuff going all the way back to 2004. Also, you may be interested in submitting an article to them. You can find their website at thejeo.com. Also, a scheduled note today at noon Central Time, we've got uh, a rescheduled session from yesterday, the one called From Generative AI to AGI, Preparing Higher Ed for the Next Technological Leap. So that's at noon Central Time today. It's on the schedule with the link. Well, we're really fortunate to have with us Masha. Say your last name. I don't want to screw it.
Jimmy.
Okay. And Spencer Willis. Uh, Masha is professor of practice and an educational developer at the University of Arizona's University Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Technology, and also chair of the college teaching graduate interdisciplinary program. And Spencer is an associate professor of practice, also at the University Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Technology. Partners with faculty through workshops, courses, and consultations to strengthen teaching and learning. And he also teaches in the graduate interdisciplinary program in college teaching. And we are fortunate to have both of them with us today. As you can see, they're going to talk on from silence to spark, designing actionable student discourse. And that's always a challenge. So I'm going to turn it over to them and they're going to amaze us with great ideas. So it's all yours.
All right, talk about raising expectations. Well, thank you, Bob, for the lovely introduction, and welcome everyone to our session from Silence to Spark Designing Actionable Student Discourse. We are streaming to you from Tucson, Arizona, the beautiful Sonoran Desert, and the ancestral homeland of the dawn or autumn. If you like, please leave a hello in the chat. Let us know from where you are tuning in. In the meantime, we'll introduce ourselves. My name is Masha Jamin. I'm a professor of practice and an educational developer at the University of Arizona. And I'm honored to be here with my wonderful colleague, Spencer.
All right, good morning, everybody. My name is Spencer Willis, and I'm an associate professor of practice and educational developer at the University of Arizona, working alongside Masha in the Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Technology. And instead of slides, today we're going to be sharing a Google Sites a link that includes a link to our handout and our session activities. And Masha's going to drop a direct link in the chat here shortly. And I believe captions should be turned on in this session as well. So our goal for today is to provide some food for thought and structural ideas for designing actionable student discourse across the modalities, and that means discourse that actually works and spark meaningful engagement for students. So when you look at the literature on sociocultural learning and dialogic education, which is basically any literature that relates to discourse-oriented teaching, you'll see a lot of ways, a lot of different ways that people have defined dialogue, discussion, and debate. And honestly, if we were to pause right now, we will all perhaps maybe define them a bit differently based on our own experiences. And the scholarship does the same. There are different models and different combination of terms, which can be a bit overwhelming. So I'll clarify the way that we're going to use terms today, starting with discourse. With discourse, we mean the act that students participating in a cooperative academic exchange about topics and contents to achieve learning. Student discourse is actionable when the why, when, where, and how of participating are clear and feasible to students. And today we'll focus on three discourse formats, what I mentioned earlier, and Masha will say more about each shortly. So I'll turn it over to you, Masha.
Yeah, so the literature uses the terms discourse formats or talk formats variably to either describe big picture strategies or specific teaching techniques. At educational developers, we differentiate a little bit more here. When we say format, we are talking about such a big picture teaching strategy or context, right? Something that helps define the type of student discourse and the purpose behind it. And to delineate our scope for this session, we decided to narrowly focus on formats that feature student to student interaction, meaning a highly structured, sustained back and forth between students with minimal participation by the instructor. And that leads us to what I lovingly call the three big Ds: dialogue, discussion, and debate. These are three fundamental formats that so teaching strategies or contexts, right? Formats that define student discourse. And so you can see them here on our Google site. I scrolled a little bit to the middle. You see a field here that shows definitions for each. Now, the literature can be confusing when it comes to defining these formats. Even dictionaries conflate them. For instance, using the word debate in a definition of discussion. So it's not easy to keep apart and agree on shared understandings. What we have done here is we have gone back to the etymology and broad historic understandings and enactments of these three formats. Now, I acknowledge that these more historical definitions may not be all that intuitive based on 21st century uses of these terms in current US politics and public life. But teaching in a globalized classroom, we've taken this more broadly and historically informed approach to these formats. And that leads us to the following definitions. So we define the purpose of a dialogue as a community building exchange of perspectives using empathy and curiosity. And that may or may not include the goal of reaching a mutual understanding or resolution. The purpose of a discussion is an open-ended exchange to solicit a multitude of information and perspectives, complicate or break down issues, and engage in collaborative reasoning. The purpose of a debate is to engage in structured argumentation and counter-argumentation to persuade and reach a decision or a resolution. So further, based on these understandings of the formats and the overall literature on dialogic education, we are making a paradigmatic assumption here. We're making the assumption that in dialogues, discussions, and debates in higher education, the effort is cooperative, learning-oriented, and seeks to achieve shared goals for a common good. So to let these definitions trickle in a little, we'd like to ask you a question. And Bob, if you can launch the first poll, this would be the perfect time. The question we have for you is, have you ever explicitly defined a format of student discourse in any of your teaching situations or teaching contexts? And this should be the other poll, if we can. Can we switch the poll?
Okay, I launched it.
Yeah. Are you able to close it?
Well, okay, so one vote.
We can actually also do that in the chat. We don't need a poll for this.
Okay, yeah, okay, we got two votes.
So since the wrong poll is showing, let me post the question I have for you in the chat. Have you
Oh.
ever explicitly defined a format of student discourse in a teaching situation? And maybe you can post in the chat, yes, for a dialogue, yes, for a discussion, for a debate, or no, I have not.
So we got one for number 2 and one for number 3.
Yes, I get a few yeses here. And for those of you who did, have you used a similar definition or one that's dissimilar to the ones I just shared for our session? Similar. Okay. Yeah, similar. Okay. So that's very good. These definitions and the paradigmatic assumption of cooperative engagement for a common good signify that these formats serve people in understanding each other better, right? Now, this agreement or assumption needs to be consciously addressed and agreed on by all participants, precisely because that may not be people's current frame of reference, especially when they think about something like a discussion or a debate. It may not appear to them to be a cooperative effort. So if we want it to be that, we have to clarify it. Any discourse behavior is learned, it is socialized. So we may have to help our students re-socialize into norms and behaviors they aren't used to from their daily environments. And so explicitly setting this paradigmatic assumption is part of orienting students and enabling an actionable student discourse. So for the next part, we will switch to our session handout. If you are on our website, feel free to follow it independently, but I'm going to call it up here. You see the link smack in the middle of our website. In this accompanying handout to our session, you find a big table where we pull together all kinds of information. I hope you can see it here. If not, please let me know. The first row are these format definitions I just went over that are also on our website. And I would like to draw your attention here to the next row, which is labeled talk moves. And the reason why we want to talk about that is because we need to define more than just a format definition to our students in order to make what they're supposed to do actionable. Now, scholars use terms like discourse moves, dialogic moves, or, as we used it, talk moves, to refer to specific language strategies and behaviors that participants use, the kind of moves that are seen as appropriate and valuable within different discourse formats. In other words, expressions and behaviors that move the discourse forward in that desired form. So what you see listed here for each of the three big Ds are behavioral principles for participation in each format. And this is not a comprehensive list. These are simply sample behaviors that participants would need to enact to achieve the overall purpose or goal of that selected format. And I won't read them all here, but I'll give a few examples, and I ask you to listen to the behavioral shifts between these formats. So in a dialogue, we seek to understand someone else's standpoint. To achieve a deeper understanding of others' perspectives, one has to listen closely and empathetically, suspend judgment, ask questions focused on better comprehension, and reflect back one's understanding with humility to confirm if it is accurate. In a discussion, we may suspend our standpoint, if we have one, to open up for critical thinking, to gather as many perspectives and differing information as possible. One needs to ask exploratory questions, focus on facts and expertise, critically explore assumptions, and invite others to think together and develop counter ideas as well. In a debate, we try to persuade others of our standpoint. When arguing and counter-arguing to reach a resolution or make a decision, one focuses on argumentation based on facts and evidence, invites others to follow one's own way of thinking, and seeks clarity on the differences between identified standpoints. So when you think about these talk moves, we want to pause and let you actually work with them a bit. So if you navigate to our website, and let me repost the link here in case anyone joined late. Here's the link to the website again. If you scroll down a little bit, you see two buttons here, Activity 1 and Activity 2. There is a 404 error. Spencer, might you be able to check on that?
Yeah, I'll take a look at it.
Thank
Let's
you
see.
so much. So for those of you who can, and I hope at least some do, I'd like to ask you to click on the Activity 1 button. And it should take you to Student Discourse Sorting Activity. And what we have here is a Google form, and we have listed expressions, things people may say. In other words, examples of talk moves. And what we ask you to do relatively quickly, without overthinking it, and without worrying about a right or wrong, because there isn't one, please sort each of these prompts by whether you think it best supports a dialogue, a discussion, or a debate. So we have those sample prompts of talk moves, and you can click on whether you think it's dialogue, discussion, or debate. Let me give you a moment here, or let's see how we can solve the error first, so you can access this activity.
Let's try refreshing the link now. I think I have to update the permissions.
It works now. Oh, I'm glad. Sorry
Okay.
for the inconvenience. Thank you so much, Spencer. All right, let's give you a moment. So on our website,
You click on Activity 1.
yeah, if you scroll down a little bit behind that long gray bar, there's Activity 1 and Activity 2. We are going to Activity 1.
Okay.
And then you can scroll down right away to the Google forum, and you should be able to start clicking on things here. All right, we have 2 responses. Give it one more second here. All right, so with 3 responses given, let us have a look here. The prompt, can you say more about what led you to that perspectives? We have each person choosing a different format. And yes, this is a talk move that, depending on the context in which it is uttered, can support any of the formats, right? So situational context is really important here. What evidence or data supports that claim? We see here folks leaning toward discussion and debate, yeah, because both of these deal with trying to look at evidence critically. Am I hearing two different interpretations here? Yes. That kind of clarification question, particularly helpful in discussions, and that's where we had most people respond, but it can come up in different contexts as well. Let me restate what was just said to see if I understand. Yes, technically we could have that in all three formats as well, but many of you lean toward the dialogue specifically because we know that format serves to try to understand others' perspectives. And so it's particularly important to report back. Is this what I'm hearing? Can you correct me if I'm hearing it wrong, right? Are there any perspectives we haven't considered yet? Most of you leaned toward the discussion. Yes, the dialogue, it may happen as well, but particularly in the discussion, we want those multitudes of perspectives. And so trying to figure out what perspective may not have been heard or considered is really important there. What would someone who disagrees most strongly say here? All right. You also figured out that this could be part of all three formats because, again, it is about understanding the diversity of perspectives. I would argue that it is particularly important in a discussion, right? Because we want the arguments, counter-arguments, agreements, disagreements. We want to tease these things out, again, get a multitude of perspectives and information. So to ask and project to say, what would someone who disagrees most strongly say here? What are other arguments we should take into account, particularly helpful for discussions? What did you mean by XYZ? Can you say more about that? Yes, I love that you all leaned very heavily toward the dialogue, again, understanding someone else's perspective, but also the discussion, right? Asking for more information, for elaboration, clarification, very much also part of a discussion. I am beginning to change my position because. Wonderful. You also had a split here across the three formats. You may see it particularly often in a discussion, because if we remember in a discussion, we may enter with a certain opinion or standpoint, but we're entering it with the willingness to change it if we hear arguments that may convince us otherwise. So the most likely place where we hear a statement like, I am beginning to change my position because, maybe in a discussion, but also in a debate with debate participants who try to argue and counter-argue in order to ultimately reach a resolution and make a decision. And so somebody may begin to lean into another position there. Let's focus on deciding which option is most defensible. You were very clearly leaning toward a debate here. Yeah. Can you give an example? Wonderful. I love that you all are split across the three formats. That is a good talk move that, again, helps to better understand what somebody else is saying by asking for examples. Take your time. We'll wait. Wonderful. You all leaned heavily to a dialogue, discussion as well. This talk move can be really helpful for both formats. We'll see it particularly often in a dialogue. Giving people time to share, especially personal experiences and their thoughts in a dialogue is very frequent. And there we may need more silences, more time to think, more time to gather one's thoughts and one's word to express oneself. So very, very important for a dialogue format. Would you agree or disagree with that? I love that you have this across all formats. It could definitely show up in any context. Particularly, I would say, again, in discussions where we try to tease out where agreements or disagreements are, where we try to explore, are there disagreeing perspectives with something? So asking for agreement or disagreement, very, very helpful, especially in a discussion. And I think that's that. So To something to consider for these talk moves is to reflect on the purposes for each, how it may support or hinder discourse based on format and situation. So some things like, what's your evidence for this? Can you give evidence? May sometimes hinder if it is uttered in a dialogue, for instance, right? So talk moves don't fit everywhere, depending on the context and the situation. Sometimes it is not the talk move itself, but how it is embedded in what is said before and after. So it can be really, really helpful to crowdsource such expressions, concrete examples for talk moves with your students, such as the ones you saw in this Google form. Because communicating about the associated talk moves for a desired format is essential to make student discourse actionable. And crowdsourcing or providing concrete expressions in quotation marks helps many students, particularly those who may not be so outspoken, who may not be native speakers, and so on and so forth. So this is really, really helpful. And I give you an example just from my own teaching real quick. I teach brilliant doctoral students. These are content experts, caring people, diligent team players, right? But I cannot assume, given our different backgrounds, that they know what purpose and what behavioral expectations I have in mind when I tell them, have a dialogue about X or have a discussion about Y. So it requires a bit of orientation so we can all enter a specific instance of student discourse with shared expectations and communication patterns. So after setting the foundations with the discourse formats and the talk moves, let's talk a little bit more about the concrete implementation of it all. And I'll let Spencer take it from here.
Thanks, Masha. So Masha just went over the formats, and we talked a little, or we indicated that the format is the overall discourse strategy or context. But in contrast, when we say technique, we mean a specific activity structure that brings a discourse format into life. And many of us are already using these types of techniques. So think about jigsaws or round robins, or perhaps maybe structured interviews. As we mentioned already, what you see on the handout are only samples of techniques. And you probably have used other techniques in your teaching practice. And if you have, we would invite you to share some of those techniques in the chat with us. Um, but what matters is this. The same technique may be able to enact more than one format depending on how it's designed and what behaviors are expected. So in our session handout, we listed some handbooks as sources for techniques. And you can also find many great ones online. But using a specific technique, even one just as a guiding framework, gives us something more concrete to plan around. So it helps us think through what we want to consider and implement. So whatever strategy that we choose has a clear, actionable structure for students. And below the row with techniques in the handout, you'll see the ones on EdTech Tools. But let's begin with considering the teaching modalities first. So across modalities, across in-person, asynchronous, online, and asynchronous settings, the pattern is the same. Every modality gives you something and takes something away. So in an in-person environment, it offers immediacy, but can limit reflection. In a synchronous online environment, it can expand access, but can also reduce the social cues because of the virtual environment. And then same with asynchronous environment, it can lower the participation barriers, but it requires a strong structures to keep the students engaged. So the takeaway is this: there isn't a best modality. It's a discourse that needs to be more intentional as we have more and more constraints appear. Every modality has its trade-offs, and it's important to incorporate or be mindful of thoughtful design practices to ensure that discourse stays purposeful, inclusive, and engaging for students. So across all modalities, the universal design for learning principles can offer some helpful strategies. So starting with one, they can help ensure that materials work with text-to-speech software, screen readers, include captions or transcripts to make sure that all learners have access to the learning materials in a way they prefer. And it offers multiple ways to contribute. So thinking of oral, written, and visual, supporting all the learning preferences of the learners. And when we think about using educational technology for asynchronous learning, it's helpful to recognize that not all tools will serve the same purpose when it comes to student discourse. And when choosing tools, the key question isn't what can this tool do, but what kind of discourse does this tool make easy or hard? So, for example, tools that support dialogue tend to humanize interactions. So they will add things like the emoji reactions or GIFs, or perhaps maybe animated images to support humanization in the virtual environment. Tools that support discussion help structure thinking. So think of offering features like multiple formats, like text, audio, video, images, things of that nature. And then tools that support debate make argumentation more visible. So they include features like threaded replies or embedded reminders about the norms for civil discourse, or a cue to action, a cue to behave accordingly. And there are also visual elements like stamps and markers that can help, that can be helpful for psychological safety. So the key takeaway is the tools that you choose can either support or limit the kind of discourse that you want to foster. And it's important that you align your choice with your goal, whether it's building connection or deepening understanding, or perhaps maybe sharpening your students' argumentation skills. It's important to align your choice with your goal. And if you are aware of any other tools that might be helpful in facilitating those 3Ds, dialogue, debate, and discussion asynchronously, please let us know in the chat. And I know we're running a little bit low on time, so to make this all more concrete, we wanted to give you an opportunity to diagnose what student discourse looks like in practice. So we created a few classroom scenarios where student talk didn't quite do what the instructor hoped it would. And we're going to explore those more now. So since we have a small group, I think we can vote on which case study we'd like to focus more on. As mentioned earlier, we have three case studies, starting with We All Spoke and Nothing Happened. And that speaks to students engaging in the sensitive topic about equity and access in higher education. The second case study is this was supposed to be a discussion, and this is about students who are asked to discuss a complex policy question with multiple trade-offs. And you'll learn more about what happens with that discussion. And then our final one is strong opinions but weak arguments. And this is about a debate activity where an instructor has developed and encouraging students to discuss or debate a highly contested socio-political issue with no clear solution. So I think we have a few minutes maybe to briefly review which ones you like to focus more on, and then we'll work together as a group on that one case study. Masha, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, these are all three really good case studies. They were independent of modality. Um, and so I would say anyone we jump in is great.
So we have one vote for number three. And if Tamara, that works with you, if that works for you, then we can go with number three. Bob has voted for number three. All right. So Tamara, I hope number three works for you. Perhaps we can take a few minutes to review that the verbiage in the case study, and then maybe after 10 minutes or so, we'll join together as a group and discuss. And thanks for enlarging it, Masha.
Yeah, we have only 11 minutes left.
Oh, 11, I'm sorry.
Mhm.
I'm sorry. So let's take about 3 minutes to review. All right, so in about 2 minutes, we'll discuss our discussion prompts listed below. All right, we have about a minute or left. Do we need one more minute, or are we ready to discuss? Maybe a thumbs up if you're ready to discuss. Okay.
Yeah, there's no need to go prompt by prompt, but the overall questions here is, what are some talk moves that are essential but missing here? What techniques could be have been used? What tools may have facilitated things? So anything you that comes up in your thinking, feel free to share by speaking up or posting it in the chat.
Yes, please.
Right, we have one here in the chat from Ashley. What evidence would support this? Is a question that would require students to make a facts over feelings statement. happened, right? So one of the things that went wrong here is that the students based it on their own experience, on their beliefs, but they weren't really focused on facts and evidence as a centerpiece of the debate.
Mhm.
So there's something that would have need to be done in orienting students to what a debate is about and helping students prepare those facts and pieces of evidence, prepare the arguments.
Yeah, and I will also add that it's important in a debate, as we stated earlier, the importance of active listening, listening to your peers, as we said earlier, not responding in an emotional way, and being curious to really understand the other's perspective, to learn and to share your perspective with evidence. And ideally, if you're actively listening, then you should be able to respond to what your fellow debater uh, is uh, is proposing or projecting.
Mhm. And the big key part here is what it says up there. No guidance is provided about evidence, rebuttals, or structure of the debate. So what we see here is an instructor assuming that students know what a debate is, that they have the same viewpoint as the instructor of how to define a debate, and that they would know what it takes to participate in one. So what is really missing here in the design from the side of the instructor is a technique. A technique can really help students providing a high structure environment to enact a certain format. So if we think back to our handout here and some sample techniques we have included, the debate could have been structured like a parliamentary debate or a split room debate or an academic controversy. The numbers you see here behind the technique names, they refer to the numbers here for the main sources we've used. That is why it is so helpful to look at some of the handbooks that lay out the techniques, how exactly they are structured, what it takes for them, and how to debrief them afterward with the students to say, okay, I want my students to hold a debate, but how are we going to do that? The techniques come in really helpful. And even if you don't follow any of the techniques you may find in the literature, looking at these models tells you what it takes to create a technique, to give it the structure it takes in order to enact that format successfully. So in our third case example here, really any of the techniques might have been helpful. The absence of having a high structure setup for the students contributed to the debate failing and deriving into belief and feeling statements over an evidence-based argumentation and counter-argumentation. So with 3 minutes left to our session, we would like to see if any one of you has a burning question or something you're puzzled about or something you would simply like to know more about. All right. Well, you have our contact here on the website. I hope you enjoy the materials that come with it. I hope you have enjoyed this session and found it useful. Bob, thank you again for inviting us into this conference and for organizing it. And thank you all for being here and making time. Wishing you a wonderful week. And Bob, I give the word to you in case there are any wrap-up remarks that would be helpful.
Yeah, I appreciate the way you've delineated all of this has been really helpful. And as you know, trying to get, students to really get involved in things is often difficult. So very helpful. I appreciate it. And Ashley, thanks. for being right on so many things. So, Mashka and Spencer, I appreciate you taking the time to do this. It's very helpful. And we're going to move on to the next session in just a moment.